Hello, wanderer of time. Where are you in this moment? Is it night where you are? Or morning, perhaps, with the first light touching your window? What country holds you now? And what hour glows on your clock? I am speaking to you from the heart of ages long gone, from sands that once burned beneath the Egyptian sun. I am Nefertiti, once called the beautiful one who has come. My voice crosses deserts and centuries to reach you, so that you might know who I was and what became of me. Close your eyes, if you wish, and listen, for I will tell you my truth, the truth hidden beneath gold and dust, love and ruin, faith and betrayal. Do you feel it, my friend? The soft hum of eternity beneath your skin. That hum is the same breath that once warmed the stones of Thebes. I am speaking to you from its memory, from a place where the air shimmered with gold dust and the scent of lotus. My name was Nefertiti. They called me the beautiful one who has come. Yet I was only a girl then, small, curious, barefoot, and endlessly dreaming. I was born in a house of quiet power. My father served the priests of Amun, and every dawn he walked into the temple halls barefoot, his robe trailing over cool limestone. I would follow in silence, hidden behind the columns, peeking through the light that spilled across the floor. The smell of oil and myrrh clung to my hair. The deep chanting of the priests trembled through my bones like thunder inside a seashell. I thought that sound was the voice of the gods themselves, soft, endless, and alive. Our garden opened to the Nile. I used to sit there at sunrise, my knees drawn to my chest, tracing shapes in the dust, while fishermen pushed their reed boats into the mist. The air would glitter as if 1,000 unseen wings brushed through it. That was my world, half real, half dream. My mother often said I was born beneath a sign. When I cried for the first time, she told me a ray of sunlight broke through the window and fell upon my face. The midwife gasped and whispered, "She belongs to Ra." From then on, everyone seemed to look at me with expectation, as if the gods had left something glowing behind my eyes. But I was just a child. I chased dragonflies. I ran barefoot through wet grass. I laughed too loudly in the palace corridors. I did not yet understand destiny. Sometimes, when the air was thick and hot, I would slip away to the roof of our home. From there, the city of Thebes looked endless, its rooftops shimmering like scales of a sleeping beast. Beyond them, the desert spread wide and pale, as if the world itself had forgotten where to end. I used to watch the horizon and wonder what lay beyond the sand, whether gods truly lived in the sky, or if they walked among us, disguised as wind and light. Once, an old woman from the temple took my hands and whispered, "You see the world as it was before names." I did not understand then, but her words stayed. Perhaps that is what made me different. I could see the stillness inside things, the light that lived beneath every shadow. As I grew, I learned the language of power, the weight of silence, the art of grace, the way eyes could command more than 100 soldiers. But my heart remained restless. I wanted to understand the fire that burned inside the sun. I wanted to speak to it, to ask why it never tired of rising. One dawn, when I was nearly grown, I walked alone to the edge of the river. The city still slept, wrapped in violet haze. I knelt, dipped my hands into the water, and watched the first reflection of the sun tremble across the surface. For a moment, I felt it, that warmth entering me like a promise. The priest said such moments were omens. I only knew it felt like being seen, completely. Later, I will learn that another soul, far away, had felt the same call. A young prince named Akhenaten, who spoke not to men, but to the sun itself. I did not know it then, but our lives were already moving toward each other, like two rivers bound for the same sea. When I closed my eyes that morning, I whispered into the light, "If you are a god, and the light, soft and silent, seemed to whisper back, I already have. Do you feel it, my friend? That golden hum in the air, like the breath of the desert before dawn? It always begins that way, quietly. Change never arrives with thunder. It comes like the light creeping over the horizon, soft and patient, until the whole world is burning without knowing when it started. I was still young then, though age means little when the soul is older than its body. My days in Thebes were filled with sunlight and ritual. Every morning, the servants bathed me in oils, scented with lotus and frankincense, combed my hair until it shone like dark silk, and placed thin lines of kohl around my eyes, not for vanity, but to protect them from the glare of the god. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Chariots rolled through narrow streets, children laughed near the river banks, and the call of the temple horns rose through the morning haze, like the heartbeat of the divine. I often watched my father as he served among the priests of Amun. He believed in order in the old gods who had ruled Egypt since the first sunrise. He was a good man, steady as the river, but I could see the doubt that had begun to live behind his eyes. The gods were silent. The temples grew rich, while the people grew thin, and though no one dared to say it, faith had become a trade. Sometimes, at dusk, I would stand on the balcony above the garden and watch the sun disappear behind the palms. There was always a single moment, just before the last light faded, when the air trembled as if holding something sacred. It was then that I would whisper my secrets to the dying day. I would tell the sun of my dreams, of my longing to be more than a shadow in marble halls, of my wish to understand the fire that ruled the heavens. I did not know that somewhere far across the sands, another soul was whispering back. His name came to me first as a rumor. A strange prince, they said, one who refused to kneel before the old gods. He prayed to no statue, lit no incense. Instead, he stood alone before the rising sun, his arms open wide, his voice lifted, not in chant, but in conversation, as though speaking to a friend. Some called him blasphemer, others said he was mad, but I felt a shiver of recognition, though I could not say why. The whispers followed me everywhere, in the baths, in the courtyards, among the silken gossip of noble women. They said he was unlike any prince Egypt had ever known. Tall, slender, with eyes that saw through walls and words alike. He questioned the priests. He spoke of one God, not many, a God of light, of truth, of creation itself. He called him Aten, and when he spoke that name, they said, his face seemed to glow as if the god himself lived behind his skin. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was foolish to dream of a man I had never seen. But when I stood in the sunlight, I felt watched not by eyes, but by destiny. It was as though the light itself had chosen me, brushing my shoulders, whispering my name in a language only the heart understands. One evening, my mother found me, kneeling beside the pool, staring at the reflection of the setting sun. You are in love with the sky, she said softly. I smiled. Is that so terrible? She shook her head. Not terrible, but dangerous. The sky never belongs to anyone. Her words trembled through me like the first warning of a storm. Then came the day he arrived. The palace stirred before dawn, servants running, musicians tuning their harps, the air thick with perfume and nerves. They said the young prince would visit Thebes to offer prayers in the temple of Amun. Though everyone knew he came to defy it, I dressed in linen white as moonlight, my hair braided with thin strands of gold, my body trembling beneath calm gestures. I told myself I would not care, but when the horns sounded and the gates opened, my heart forgot its rhythm. He entered without fanfare, no heavy crown, no jeweled cloak, just a simple robe of ivory cloth that caught the sun and turned it to fire. His face was unlike any I had seen, long, serene, not handsome in the way sculptors carved kings, but alive, illuminated. When he walked, the air around him seemed to hush, as though the world itself leaned closer to listen. And then he looked at me. That look it was not admiration nor curiosity. It was recognition, as though he had found something he had been seeking for lifetimes. For a heartbeat, the room vanished. The pillars, the courtiers, the gold, all dissolved into light. There was only his gaze, and in it I felt seen not as a daughter, not as a jewel, not as a symbol of beauty, but as something ancient and equal. He spoke little that day. When he did, his voice was low and warm, like a prayer meant for one listener. He said my name, Nefertiti, slowly tasting it, almost reverently. "The beautiful one who has come?" he murmured. "From where? I wonder." And I, who had never been without words, could only whisper, "From the light." He smiled faintly and nodded, as though that answer had always been waiting for him. That night, I could not sleep. The moon poured over the river like spilled milk, and I wandered through the garden barefoot, my hands brushing the cool leaves. Every sound felt alive: the rustle of reeds, the sigh of water, the cry of night birds. I spoke to the air as if it could carry my words to him. You spoke to the sun, I whispered. And now the sun has spoken to me. Days turned to weeks. Letters came and went through the priests, polite and formal, yet beneath their lines of courtesy I could feel the pulse of something forbidden, something holy. He invited my family to his estate, beyond the hills, where the temples were open to the sky. There I saw him again, not as a prince, but as a man consumed by light. He stood before the dawn, his arms open wide, the first fire of Aten burning behind him. When he prayed, his words were not memorized chants, but tender, trembling speech, as if speaking to a beloved. And when he turned to me, I understood that he saw the divine not above us, but within us. In that moment, the world changed. The sun rose higher, and I knew it would never set the same way again. I loved him, though love is too small a word for what it was. It was recognition, surrender, illumination. He made me see that beauty was not in gold or jewels, but in the light that moved through living things, the pulse beneath skin, the shimmer of breath in the air. When he took my hand, I felt it, that same hum I had always felt in the silence before dawn. It was not two souls meeting, but two halves remembering they had once been whole. He said, "Together we will build a city where the sun never hides." I did not yet know what that meant, but I nodded because I believed him, because when he spoke, the world itself seemed to lean closer. And as we stood there beneath the rising Aten, light spilling across the desert like molten glass, I heard the whisper that would follow me all my life. To love the sun is to become its flame. I remember that first morning in his estate, the one they called the House of Dawn. It was unlike any palace I had ever seen. There were no roofs to hide the sky, no dark halls heavy with idols, only open courtyards washed in gold, white columns like ribs of a sleeping god, and the sound of wind weaving through the stone. Servants moved quietly, barefoot, carrying offerings of bread and wine and flowers, not for a statue, but for the rising sun. Everything there seemed alive, breathing. Even the shadows were gentle. And in the center of it all stood Akhenaten, the prince who prayed to the light. He was facing the horizon, arms lifted, eyes closed, whispering words I could not hear. The sun rose slowly behind him, painting the world in molten amber. For a heartbeat, I thought the light itself poured from his body. He turned toward me, and I saw tears on his cheeks, not of grief, but of awe. I wanted to understand that feeling, to touch that devotion that made even the sky listen. He said to me softly, "You feel it too, don't you? The silence that isn't empty?" And I nodded, though I could barely breathe. He smiled, and for the first time, I felt that perhaps the gods were not above us at all, but between us. We walked through the gardens as the world awoke around us. Birds sang from the papyrus reeds, their wings flashing in the light. Lotus blossoms opened one by one, sighing into the morning. He spoke of a dream, of a city built not for kings or priests, but for the sun itself. A place where no darkness would be worshipped, where people would pray under the open sky. He called it Aten, the horizon of the Sunday. His voice trembled with conviction and joy, and I listened, spellbound, feeling that strange pull of destiny tighten around my heart. He told me the old gods had grown jealous of the light, that their temples had become prisons of shadow. But Aten, the living sun, needed no walls. He shines for everyone, he said, even for those who curse his name. Then he looked at me, his gaze bright and unflinching. "And you, Nefertiti, you are the reflection of that light. I saw you in a dream before I ever saw your face." The words sank into me like warm water. I did not know what to say, for no one had ever spoken to me as if I were real, not carved from expectation or beauty, but alive, burning, breathing, free. When I finally found my voice, it came as a whisper. "If I am light, then I am yours to guide." He reached out, and for a moment our hands touched just a brush of skin, but the air between us turned electric. I could feel the pulse of the earth, the heartbeat of the Nile, the trembling of the leaves. Everything seemed to hold its breath. That was the first time I understood that love could be holy. In the days that followed, he taught me how to pray without words. We would rise before dawn and walk barefoot into the fields, dew clinging to our ankles, the air cool and fragrant with life. He would close his eyes and whisper to the sky, not asking for anything, but simply listening, as if the universe itself were breathing through him. I began to do the same, and when the first rays of sunlight touched my skin, I felt not warmth, but awareness. It was as if the world was watching me back. He showed me how to paint the sun's journey on the walls, how to draw rays ending in tiny hands that touched the faces of men and women. He said, "The God is not far away. He touches us every day. You only need to see." And I did see, in the shimmer of the river, in the breath of wind across my palms, in his eyes, where the dawn never faded. Our time together passed like honey dripping from a jar, slow, golden, endless. Yet, beneath it all, I could feel the tremor of something waiting, a change too vast for the world to contain. The priests muttered behind us. They feared him. They feared me. But I no longer feared them, for I had touched the divine, and it had answered me back. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky turned the color of pomegranate, we stood together on the terrace. He said, "The gods have many names, but only one truth. You and I, we are that truth." I felt his hand find mine, warm and steady. I leaned my head against his shoulder and watched the light fade between the columns. "I am not afraid of darkness," I said, and he whispered, "That is why the sun chose you." That night, I could not sleep. The world outside my window glowed with the breath of the moon, and I lay awake, tracing patterns of gold dust across the sheets with my fingertips. I thought of his eyes, of the fire in his voice, of the way he spoke to the sun, as if it were an old friend. I wanted to believe, as he did, completely, recklessly, and I think that, in that moment, I did. For when the dawn came, I rose before the servants, walked to the balcony, and lifted my hands toward the sky. The sun broke open the horizon in 1,000 shades of flame, and I felt tears on my cheeks, just as he had. It was not sadness, it was surrender. It was knowing that I was no longer just Nefertiti, the daughter of priests, the ornament of Thebes. I was becoming something else, something vast and bright and terribly fragile. Love had found me, but it was not the gentle kind that stays hidden in chambers. It was the kind that builds empires and burns them to ash. They said the day of our wedding was chosen by the gods. I remember the way the dawn looked that morning, the sky a soft rose gold, the desert still asleep beneath its veil of mist. Even the Nile seemed to slow its current, as if the river itself wished to watch. The air carried a sweetness I had never known before, thick with the scent of blue lotus and burning myrrh, and beneath it all, the hum of drums low, slow, and deep, echoing through the palace like the heartbeat of the world. I was dressed in linen thin as breath, dyed with crushed saffron, shimmering pale gold when it caught the light. My hair was bound in dark braids, crowned with turquoise beads and a small disk of hammered gold. The servants whispered blessings as they moved around me, their voices trembling with awe. They said no mortal had ever looked so radiant, but I did not feel like a queen. I felt like a flame, fragile and burning. When I stepped into the courtyard, the sunlight struck me with its full force. For a moment, I couldn't see the world turned white and dazzling, and then, through the haze, I saw him. Akhenaten waited at the far end of the great avenue, between two towering obelisks carved with the names of forgotten gods. He wore no crown that day, only a robe, the color of dawn, his chest bare, his skin glowing in the light. Around him, the priests murmured, uneasy, their lips forming prayers to deities whose thrones were crumbling. But his eyes were calm. When he looked at me, everything else fell away. I walked toward him slowly, each step measured to the rhythm of the drums. The sun climbed higher, gilding the stones beneath my feet. The people of Thebes lined the terraces above, throwing petals of jasmine and papyrus into the air. I could hear them whispering my name, Nefertiti, Nefertiti, but their voices felt far away, like echoes underwater. When I reached him, he took my hands in his, and I felt the heat of his skin, steady and alive. He said softly, "Do you see, beloved, the sun bears witness." And I whispered, "Then let it remember us." He smiled, not as a man, but as something brighter. And then, in front of all of Egypt, we lifted our faces toward the sky together. No idol stood between us and the light. No priest spoke the words. It was he who spoke a vow, not to me alone, but to the divine that lived through us both. He said, "We are not apart from the God. We are his breath, his shadow, his reflection. You, Nefertiti, are the living mirror of the sun." The crowd gasped. The priest turned pale, but I felt no fear. In that instant, I understood our marriage was not of earth, but of eternity. The warmth that surrounded us was not merely light, it was recognition. It was the world bowing to the inevitable. Afterward, when the formalities ended, we stood together on the temple steps. The horizon burned with 1,000 shades of gold and crimson. Musicians played softly harps, flutes, and the deep heartbeat of drums echoing from far below. I leaned my head against his shoulder, my pulse still trembling. He said, "The old gods will not forgive us." And I whispered, "Then let them fade, as night fades before morning." He laughed, and his laughter was sunlight. Then together, he said, "We will build a world where morning never ends." From that day, the palace became a place of light. We opened the temple roofs, tore down the idols, and let the wind and sun fill the sacred halls. We painted the walls not with images of gods, but with the faces of men and women, their hands lifted toward the disk of Aten, rays ending in small hands that offered life to all. Each evening, we would walk through the courtyards, hand in hand, the setting sun laying a path of fire before us. I began to see how deeply he believed. To Akhenaten, every breath was worship. Every touch, every color, every sound was a hymn to light. And in his devotion, I found both wonder and fear, because when you love something that vast, something so consuming, it begins to take you apart, piece by piece. Yet I did not resist. I gave myself to it, to him, to the radiance that flowed through us both. At night, we would sit by the open balcony, the desert stretching before us like an ocean of gold dust. He would rest his head against mine and whisper, "Listen, beloved, the sun never truly sets. It only hides the dream." And I would close my eyes and imagine the world beneath the stars, sleeping, breathing, waiting to be reborn with us. But sometimes, when the wind fell still and the torches flickered low, I would sense another presence watching. The heavy, silent gaze of the old gods, patient and wounded. They did not speak, but I could feel their resentment in the stillness, the way shadows gathered at the corners of the halls. It frightened me, not for myself, but for him. He had declared war on heaven, and he did it with love. In the months that followed, the drums of celebration gave way to hammers. Stone by stone, our city began to rise. Amarna, the horizon of Aten, a place built for light. The river bent around it like an embrace, and the sand glittered with shards of quartz, as though the desert itself approved. I remember standing atop the half-built terrace, the wind tugging at my veil, the scent of gypsum and salt thick in the air. Below me, hundreds of workers sang as they carved. Their song rose and fell like the tide, and at the edge of the construction stood Akhenaten, his arms outstretched, greeting the sunrise. He turned to me and shouted through the wind, "Do you see, my queen? Even the earth obeys when the sun commands." I smiled, though the wind caught my tears and scattered them. "Yes," I whispered, "but the earth must rest, my love. Even the sun leaves the sky for a while." He only smiled back, the kind of smile that belongs to prophets, not kings. That night, as we lay together beneath a canopy of white silk that fluttered like wings, he traced his fingers along my wrist and said, "You are my other half, Nefertiti, my voice when I am silent, my dawn when I am lost. Without you, the light would be too bright to bear." And I whispered, "Then let me share it." He kissed my hands, his lips warm and reverent. And somewhere beyond the palace, the night broke open, flooding with light, the same pale, eternal light that had bound us from the beginning. But even in that perfection, I felt a tremor small, unseen, like the breath before a storm. Because even as the world rejoiced in our golden union, I could feel the balance shifting. The priests whispered in darkness, the old gods stirred in their forgotten tombs, and I, Nefertiti, beloved of the sun, queen of a new world, could not yet see the shadow my light would cast. There are moments when dreams become too real to survive. They take shape in stone, in dust, in the trembling hands of those who believe, and that is when they begin to die. Our dream was called Amarna, but to us, it was more than a city. It was a hymn built in limestone, a prayer carved into the bones of the desert. Akhenaten called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the sun, and he said it would be the place where light and life would dwell forever. I remember the first time we stood upon that empty stretch of sand, miles of gold and silence, broken only by the wind and the slow heartbeat of the river curving nearby. The air shimmered as though the gods were watching, waiting. Akhenaten turned to me, his robe snapping in the heat, and said, "Here, beloved, we will raise a world without shadows." I laughed softly, shading my eyes against the glare. "There is no such world, my love. Even the sun casts darkness when it shines." But he only smiled the way he always did when he believed too much to argue. And so the building began, the desert filled with the sound of chisels, hammers, and songs. Thousands of hands lifted stones that would one day touch eternity. We walked among them daily, the workers bowed, calling us the children of Aten, and we, in turn, blessed them with our gaze. The air trembled with devotion. It was as if the whole kingdom was holding its breath. I designed the gardens myself. I wanted them open to the sky, so that the light could flow unhindered rows of papyrus and palms, surrounding reflecting pools where lotus blossoms would drift, and mirrors of water would catch the fire of dawn. When the wind passed through, the ripples glittered like gold dust, and I thought, perhaps paradise is not above us, but beneath our feet. Every morning, Akhenaten and I would ascend the steps of the great temple together. The first rays of Aten would break over the horizon, spilling through the columns, touching our faces with warmth. We would lift our hands toward the light, whispering our vows anew, not as ruler and subject, not even as man and woman, but as two reflections of the same sun. The people adored us. They painted our likeness on the temple walls, not as distant gods, but as a family. Me, Akhenaten, and our daughters, standing beneath the open disk of Aten, rays ending in tiny hands that offered us the Ankh, the breath of life. It was strange and beautiful. This love they gave us, it felt pure but also fragile, as if too much light might break it. In those days, Thebes seemed far away, its temples heavy with shadow, its priests seething in silence. They called our faith heresy. They said we had angered the old gods, that famine and drought would come as punishment. But when I stood in the sunlight, the world felt alive. Every leaf shimmered. Every grain of sand glowed with purpose. How could the gods despise what was beautiful? At noon, I would walk through the city and watch the craftsmen at work. Their skin glistened with sweat, their hands stained with ochre and lapis as they painted our images, mine with my crown of turquoise and gold, Akhenaten's with his elongated face, his eyes half closed in peace. He insisted the artists show us as we truly were, not as the old kings demanded to be perfect, impossible, divine. We are not gods, he said, but we are the path to them. I believed him then. I wanted to. Evenings were my favorite. When the heat softened and the horizon turned copper, the city would glow like a mirage. The laughter of children echoed through the courtyards. The scent of baked bread drifted from the kitchens, and the river, wide and patient, carried the reflection of the dying sun like a torch across the earth. I would stand on the balcony, my daughters playing at my feet, and think, this is what eternity must feel like, warm, still, endless. But eternity is never still for long. Soon, the air began to change. The songs of the workers grew quieter. Supplies from Thebes arrived late, or not at all. The priests of Amun spread whispers through the trade caravans that our god had blinded the harvest, that Aten was a jealous flame devouring Egypt's soul. When I looked into Akhenaten's eyes, I saw the weight of it pressing upon him. Though he refused to name it, he prayed harder, he worked longer, and sometimes, late at night, I would find him standing alone on the terrace, speaking softly to the sky, as though begging it to understand him. One evening, I joined him. The moon was thin, a silver scar across the dark. He didn't turn when I approached. Why do they fear what gives them life? He murmured. Why do they cling to their shadows? I placed my hand on his arm. Because the light is blinding, I whispered. Not all eyes are ready to see. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. Then we must teach them, he said. But how? I asked. By being what they cannot yet imagine. His faith was beautiful and terrible. It burned so fiercely that I sometimes feared it would consume him and me with it. Yet I could not pull away. I was too deeply bound, too enraptured by the vision we had birthed together. Days turned into years. The city rose from the sands, temples, gardens, statues, and palaces, gleaming in the light of Aten. Pilgrims came from distant lands to see it, to feel the warmth of the god who asked nothing but love in return. But love, I learned, is the most dangerous offering of all. It demands everything. One afternoon, as I watched the dancers move through the courtyard, their arms flowing like ribbons in the sun, a strange stillness came over me. The air thickened, the music faded, and for a moment I felt a chill as if the sun had turned its face away. A shadow passed across the garden, quick and silent. When I looked up, the sky was cloudless, but I knew something had shifted. Perhaps the gods, patient until now, had begun to stir in their forgotten tombs. That night, I could not sleep. The wind rattled the shutters like distant drums, and the silence between heartbeats grew long and heavy. I thought of the old temples, of the chants that once rose from Thebes, and for the first time, I wondered if perhaps we had reached too far. Was it possible, I asked myself, for mortals to carry the sun in their hands and not be burned? In the darkness, I whispered into the night, Aten, if you hear me, if you are truly light without shadow, then guide us. Do not let our love become a flame that devours the world. The only answer was silence, and the faint, endless hum of the desert, breathing beneath our golden city. There came a time when the people began to call me the living daughter of Aten. At first, the words embarrassed me. They felt too heavy for the smallness of my breath. But Akhenaten smiled when he heard them and said, do not deny what the light has chosen. The sun does not ask permission to shine. So I stood beside him, as equal, not consort, my crown of turquoise and gold blazing against the white of the sky, my skin gilded in the warmth of the divine. The courtiers bowed to him, but their eyes turned to me. They said that when I walked through the temple halls, shadows fled before my feet, and sometimes, when the air was still and the world glowed pale and soft, I almost believed it. We had become more than rulers. We were symbols. He the voice of the god, I the mirror through which that voice was seen, and together we carried the burden of light. Every morning before dawn, I rose while the world still slept. The servants would bring water from the Nile, cool and fragrant with petals, and pour it over my hands. Then I would dress in linen fine as breath and walk barefoot to the temple. The air was sharp, alive. In the east, the first shimmer of gold waited like a secret on the edge of the world. Drums began softly, slow as the heartbeat of earth. Priests lined the stairs, their heads bowed, their torches dying one by one as the real fire of Aten began to rise. I stood at the top of the steps, the disk of the sun breaking the horizon behind me, the wind stirring my veil. In that moment, I was not flesh and bone. I was light, given shape. I lifted my hands and spoke the hymns that Akhenaten himself had written words, not to beg, but to praise. You rise in perfection, O living Aten. No other knows you but your children. You shine upon all, great and small. You touch the faces of those you love. As I spoke, the sunlight spilled through the colonnades, gilding the walls, touching the upturned faces of our people. I saw tears on their cheeks, not of sorrow, but of wonder, the kind that comes when one sees truth made visible. In those moments, I felt something holy moving through me, as if the God himself had borrowed my voice to remind the world of its beauty. And yet, when the ceremonies ended, silence followed, a long, echoing stillness that clung to the halls like mist. Akhenaten would retreat into his private chambers, surrounded by scrolls and sketches of the sun's disk. He spoke less to me, more to the god. Sometimes I would find him kneeling for hours, unmoving, his lips pale, his eyes fixed on the light until they watered. When I touched his shoulder, He would startle as if he had forgotten that the world still existed around him. He loved the sun too much, I think. He gave it everything, his strength, his mind, even his hunger. And the more he gave, the more it demanded. I began to fear that there would be nothing left of him but light. Still, I remained beside him. I presided over the festivals, walked among the people, blessed their children, listened to their songs. They came to me with offerings, bread, flowers, small figures carved of clay, and whispered their wishes into my hands. They believed I could carry their voices to Aten, and though I never claimed such power, I carried their prayers as best I could, tucked inside my heart like fragile birds. At times, when the heat was unbearable and the horizon shimmered like molten glass, I would climb to the roof of the palace to be alone. The city stretched before me, white stone, blue pools, golden roofs, a mirage that had become real. Children laughed in the courtyards. Artisans sang at their work. The river gleamed like a serpent of silver. It was beautiful, too beautiful. Beauty like that does not last. I remember one afternoon, the sky cloudless, the air thick and heavy. I stood before the great altar, the rays of Aten bright enough to sting my eyes, but the light felt wrong, cold, almost metallic. The air did not hum as it used to. It was as if the god had turned his gaze elsewhere. That night, I told Akhenaten what I felt. He laughed, though there was no joy in it. The god does not abandon, he said. It is we who grow deaf. But what if the silence is not our doing? I asked. He turned away, his face hot in the torchlight. Do not question the light, he whispered. And I realized, with a small ache in my chest, that he no longer spoke to me, only through me, to something I could not see. The city continued its golden life, but beneath its splendor, small cracks began to form. Farmers spoke of poor harvests. The river's flood came late. Merchants brought fewer goods from the north, and in the night, when the wind howled across the sands, I could almost hear the old gods breathing again, patient and vengeful. Yet the people still looked to me their queen, their bridge to the divine. So I smiled and blessed, and spoke the words they needed to hear. But inside, a quiet fear took root, because when I closed my eyes to pray, I no longer felt the warmth of Aten upon my skin, only the memory of it. And the memory, I learned, is a colder thing than faith. Still, every dawn I rose to greet the sun. Still, I whispered hymns, because even when the light fades, the act of turning toward it is its own form of devotion. And in the solitude of my heart, I began to understand something Akhenaten never could, that true faith is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to face it and remain tender. There came a morning when the sun did not feel like fire anymore. It rose pale and uncertain. Its light diffused through a sky the color of old silk. The wind that once carried songs from the courtyards now blew dry and hollow, whispering only of dust. And when I lifted my face to Aten, I felt nothing. I told myself it was the season, that the air was changing, that perhaps even the god needed to rest. But deep within me, I knew the silence had begun. It started in the fields. The farmers, who once sang at dawn, now worked with downcast eyes. The soil cracked beneath their feet. The Nile's flood came late and thin. Grain grew sparse, and the children grew quiet. At night, I heard the city breathing differently, shallow, uneasy, like a sleeper trapped inside a fevered dream. The priests came to us, pale and trembling, their heads bowed but their eyes sharp with fear. They spoke of omens, of stars dimming, of the old gods stirring in their tombs. I saw the corners of Akhenaten's mouth tighten, his gaze burning brighter, as though denial itself were his last prayer. He dismissed them all, saying, "The light cannot fail." It is men who falter. But even as he spoke, I saw the shadow in his eyes, a shadow the sun could not erase. He prayed harder than ever. Day after day, he stood before the altar until his knees bled against the stone. Sometimes he would whisper so softly that I could not tell if he spoke to Aten or to himself. He grew thinner, paler, a man consumed by the very fire he worshipped. I tried to reach him. I would bring him water, touch his shoulders, brush my fingers against his face. But he looked through me as though I were made of smoke. Once I said to him, "My love, you cannot save the world by breaking yourself." He smiled faintly. "If the god needs my body, let him take it. What is flesh before eternity?" That was the moment I realized he had already gone where I could not follow. The people began to murmur. They whispered in the marketplaces, in the shadowed courtyards, in the alleys near the river. They spoke of famine, of sickness, of temples too empty, and hearts too full of doubt. Some began to leave offerings again in secret, tiny idols hidden in baskets of grain, prayers to Amun, to Osiris, to the gods we had silenced. When I learned of it, I did not stop them. Perhaps faith, like love, cannot be commanded. It must find its own way home. One afternoon, I went to the temple alone. The air inside was heavy with the scent of dust and old incense. The golden rays of Aten still stretched across the walls, but they seemed faded, tired. I knelt before the altar, placed my hands upon the stone, and whispered, "Where are you?" My voice broke. "Have we angered you? Have we loved you wrongly? Or have you simply turned away?" The silence that answered was vast, not cruel, not cold, but indifferent, like the sea, like eternity. When I returned to the palace, I found Akhenaten in his chamber, surrounded by scrolls and drawings of the sun. He was tracing the same circle again and again, his fingers shaking. He did not look up when I entered. "My queen," he said softly, "do you still see the light?" I hesitated, then lied. "Yes." He smiled, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Then it still lives in you. I was right to trust you." That night, as I watched him sleep, I thought of the first day we met, the warmth of his hands, the promise in his eyes, and I wondered if perhaps Aten had never been the god we sought, but the fire that lived between us, the divine spark of love that even death could not extinguish. If so, then the god had not abandoned us. We had abandoned ourselves. Days bled into weeks. The music of Amarna grew faint. Dancers no longer filled courtyards. The fountains dried, and the laughter of my daughters echoed thin and strange through the empty halls. The city of light was becoming a city of whispers. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I climbed alone to the highest terrace. The air was cool, the wind sharp with sand. I spread my arms, felt the dry heat against my palms, and whispered, "If you are still there, if you ever truly heard us, take pity on him, on us. Let the world remember the warmth, not the ruin." The horizon did not answer, but far below, a single torch flickered to life in the courtyard, a fragile, stubborn flame, refusing to die. I watched it for a long time, until my eyes blurred with tears. Then I understood. Even when the gods fall silent, it is in our hands to keep the fire alive. It began quietly, not with war cries, not with thunder, but with silence. The kind that fills the world when the breath of the gods has gone. The river turned shallow that year. The floods came late, and when they came, they carried the stench of decay. The granaries emptied, the fields cracked, and the voices of the people changed. They no longer sang to Aten at dawn. They whispered to the old gods again, to Amun, to Osiris, to any name that might bring rain or mercy. I walked among them one morning, wrapped in linen veils, my face hidden. The streets of Amarna were no longer white with dust and laughter. They were gray, quiet, hollow. Children sat listless by empty baskets. Merchants watched the horizon instead of their wares. And when I passed, they bowed, not in reverence, but in pity. I, who had once been their reflection of the divine, was now a ghost of light, long faded. When I returned to the palace, I found Akhenaten on the terrace, staring toward the east. His hands trembled as he held them open to the pale sky. He had grown thin, his face drawn and lined, his eyes fever bright. He said, without turning, "They do not look to the sun anymore." I stood beside him, silent. He whispered, "Do they not see it still burns?" And I said softly, "Perhaps they see only its heat, not its warmth." He looked at me then, and for the first time in all our years, I saw fear, not of death, but of being forgotten. He gripped my hands. "If they forget us," he said, "then light itself will die." I wanted to tell him that light never dies. It only changes shape. But my throat would not move, because I, too, had begun to doubt. The days that followed were heavy with dust and sorrow. Messengers stopped coming from Thebes. Caravans vanished before reaching the gates. The great temple of Aten stood empty but for the wind. Even the statues we had raised, their faces once shining with gold leaf, grew pale beneath the sand that crept up from the desert, grain by grain, as if the earth itself had come to bury our dream. One evening, as I walked through the courtyard, I found one of the priests kneeling before a small hidden idol of Amun. He froze when he saw me, his eyes filled with terror, expecting punishment. But I only said, "Pray as you must," and I left him there, his whisper following me like smoke. That night, Akhenaten fell ill. He refused rest, refused food. He said Aten would heal him, that the sun would not abandon its chosen son. But the days passed, and his skin turned pale as alabaster, his breath shallow. He asked for the windows to be opened wide so that the light could reach him. At noon, when the sun was fiercest, I sat beside him, fanning his face as sweat gathered on his brow. He smiled faintly. "Look," he whispered, "even now it comes to me." But what I saw was not light, it was reflection. The dying shimmer of gold on a body that could no longer feel its warmth. When he died, the world seemed to stop. No cries, no thunder, just the long, low moan of wind across the sand, as if the desert itself were mourning. I closed his eyes with my own hands, whispered a prayer that even Aten might forgive him or remember him kindly. For whatever else he was, king, prophet, dreamer, he was mine, my beloved, my mirror, my ruin. The priests came in the night. They wrapped his body in linen and took him away to a tomb carved hastily into the cliffs beyond the city. They said it was safer that way, that the people might defile him if they knew. I did not go with them. I stood on the balcony as they carried him into darkness, the torches flickering like dying stars along the road. When the last light disappeared, I whispered, "Go in peace, my love. You carried the sun farther than any man could." After that, I withdrew from the palace. The court dissolved into fear. Ministers argued, soldiers deserted, the people fled. Amarna, once the city of light, began to crumble. The murals on the walls faded, the pools dried, the gardens withered into dust. And still, the sun rose indifferent, eternal, shining upon ruins that had once believed it loved them. I spent my last days in a small chamber near the edge of the palace. The walls were bare. Only a single beam of light entered each morning through a narrow slit, moving slowly across the floor like a living thing. I would sit beside it, tracing its path with my fingertips, remembering. Sometimes I thought I heard his voice in the wind, soft, distant, calling my name across the centuries. Other times I thought it was the god himself, asking if I still believed, and I would whisper, I do, but not as before. I no longer saw Aten as a disk in the sky, nor as a jealous god demanding worship. I saw him in smaller things, in the glint of sand, in the warmth of a child's hand, in the quiet flame that burns within all hearts that dare to love. Perhaps that is what he meant all along, that the divine lives not in temples or crowns, but in the fragile light we carry inside ourselves. One evening, when the air turned cool and the first stars appeared, I walked through the empty halls one last time. The stones whispered beneath my feet. The air smelled of dust and memory. I touched the columns where his hymns were carved, my fingers tracing the fading hieroglyphs, each word a ghost, each ghost a prayer. At the temple's threshold, I turned to face the horizon. The last rays of sunset painted the sky in red and gold, the colors of love and farewell. I whispered, do you see me still? The wind rose, lifting my veil, and for an instant I thought I felt warmth against my face, soft, tender, like a hand I once knew. Perhaps it was only the desert breeze. Perhaps it was him. And as darkness fell, I smiled, for even when the sun vanished, I could still feel its echo, the faint, eternal pulse of light that neither death nor time could erase. That, I think, was the true gift of Aten, not immortality, but memory. Do you hear it, my friend? The hush between heartbeats, the sigh of sand drifting across the desert floor. That is where I sleep, not in gold, not in glory, but in silence. They never found my tomb. They searched the cliffs, the valleys, the hidden folds of stone where kings once buried their names. They found the dust of others, the bones of princes, the shattered masks of queens, but not mine, because I did not want to be found. The world had already taken enough. After Akhenaten's death, I vanished from their records, as if I had never lived. They erased my name from the walls, scratched my face from the murals, and yet here you are, listening. And so I was never truly gone. They thought silence would bury me, but silence, I learned, is not an ending. It is a doorway through which memory returns. In those final days, when the city of Amarna was dying, I walked once more to the temple. The air was heavy, sweet with decay. The columns leaned like weary giants, and the golden rays of Aten had faded to a dull glow. I knelt on the cracked stone floor, my hands open to the sky. Above me, the sun was pale, a ghost of what it had been. And yet, when I whispered my prayer, I felt something stir. Not in the heavens, but in me. It was warmth, small, fragile, but alive. A single ember glowing within my chest. And I realized then what Akhenaten had never understood. The divine does not dwell in the sun, nor in the sky, nor in the names we give our gods. It dwells in the human heart, in every act of love, in every kindness, in every tear shed for beauty that cannot last. That night, I prepared myself for sleep, not the sleep of night, but the deeper kind, the one that lasts beyond time. I bathed in water from the Nile, anointed my skin with oil of myrrh and sweet lotus. I wrapped myself in linen, the same color as moonlight. There was no priest, no ritual, no fear, only the soft song of wind and the quiet pulse of my own breath. I lay down in a small chamber cut into the rock. Around me, I placed a few simple things: a gold necklace, a comb of ivory, a painted bowl, and a small carving of Aten holding the Ankh, not as offerings, but as memories, pieces of a life that once glowed with impossible light. Before I closed my eyes, I whispered, if the world forgets me, let the desert remember. Let the sand guard my name until the wind learns to speak it again. And then I slept. The centuries passed like the turning of a single breath. Empires rose and fell. The gods change their names, but the sun, the eternal witness, still crosses the sky each day, brushing the earth with the same warmth that once kissed my skin. Sometimes, when its light falls upon the cliffs of Amarna, the sand glows faintly turquoise and gold, and those who pass feel something, a shiver, a whisper, though they cannot say why. That is me, the echo, the remembering. I am the light that lingers on the edge of dawn, the warmth that touches your face when you stand beneath an ancient sky. You may not see me, but when your heart stirs at beauty, when a beam of sunlight makes you stop and breathe, you are speaking my name, and I, Nefertiti, the one who came in beauty, the one who loved the sun too much to fear its fire. I am still here, not buried, not gone, only changed. So, wherever you are, whatever hour holds you now, look toward the east. The same sun that once crowned my world rises above yours. Close your eyes, and you will feel it. Soft, eternal, familiar, the breath of time itself. And in that warmth, you will find me. So, you have heard my story, my life of gold and silence, of love and loss, beneath the burning sky of Egypt. The city I built is gone, its stones scattered, its songs forgotten, but my voice, my heart, still found its way to you. Tell me, listener of another age, what do you think now, after all these centuries? Was life gentler in my time, when the gods still walked among us? Or is your world full of glass and noise and restless light, the truer paradise? Would you trade your endless machines and glowing screens for a single morning beside the Nile, for the warmth of the sun on your bare shoulders, for the music of reed flutes drifting through a golden dawn? I wonder about your world, about the way you worship, the way you love, the way you dream. Perhaps not so much has changed, for every heart still seeks the same fire, the same tenderness that we once called divine. If my story touched you, remember it when you see the sunrise tomorrow. That light, it is the same that crowned me once, the same that watched me fall, and the same that now touches your face. And if you ever feel alone beneath its glow, whisper my name, for I am still here, woven into the breath of the wind, waiting to hear you answer.